My family has been going through a bit of a rough patch financially recently, and I was nice enough to take up a job, so I could pay my way through college, but their expectations are too unrealistic, and just last week, they told me that I needed to dip into my college savings and help my sister out because she was about to move into a new house, but was running low on money. So, for context, my dad quit his job a couple of years ago to start a new business. Unfortunately, right around that time, COVID hit and his business was not able to take off the way he had expected. But he did not give up hope and continued to work hard on it, and he is still at it, and slowly, but surely, they are doing better. So that's great news for him, but that also means that we didn't have enough money to maintain our lifestyle for a really long time. My mother has always been a Psalm, so her starting to work was out of the question because that was not something that she wanted. And our parents told us that we had to figure out a way to live on our own. They would support us until we were 18, but after that, it would be difficult for them to set aside funds for their own retirement as well as take care of us. Already they had used up a significant amount from their savings so that we could live the way we were used to during the lockdown and stuff, so my sister and I were supposed to look after ourselves after we turned 18. A couple of weeks ago, I finally graduated high school and I am 18 right now, so I knew that I would have to cover the expenses of going to college by myself. I had it all sorted out because I had been working ever since I was 16 and had done a couple of internships, so I had managed to save the money from that, and maybe it wasn't enough to cover college, but with a student loan, I would get by easily. My sister is 22 right now, and she recently graduated. She had also taken out a student loan, but she didn't have any savings of her own. Even while she was in college, she did not bother to work, and that's totally her call. I'm not going to judge her for it. But what I am judging her for is expecting me, her younger brother, to cover the rent for her first house now that she's moving out of my parents' house for work. She and a couple of her friends from high school are getting a house and all of them have paid their shares, but she is just a couple $1,000s short of the amount that is expected from her. And she doesn't want to tell her friends that her family isn't exactly financially stable right now, because that would be pretty embarrassing for her. Although I really don't understand that. If they are really her friends, why would they judge her? Anyway, that's the reason her friends can't cover her for now, and then she would have to pay them back later. My parents have already told us that after we turn 18, we should not be expecting any sort of financial support from them, so that leaves me. The worst part is that she didn't even come to me herself to ask for the money, but she told our parents that this was what she needed and got them to speak to me instead. Full disclosure, my sister and I don't really get along well. We are just really different, and I was kind of glad when she told us that she would be moving out, because having her move back in after she graduated from college for a couple of weeks until she found a job was pretty tiring for me. Last week, when this happened, we were all living together. I'm going to start college in a couple of months, and I already have my uncle and aunt who have signed off on the loan. And my sister was supposed to move out a couple of days back, although I don't really know what happened with that. 3 days before she was supposed to move out, my parents came to my room and told me about how she was just short of a couple of $1,000s and they knew that I had been saving money for college, so they wanted me to just dip into those savings for this and help my sister out. They even reassured me that she would pay me back at the earliest, even though she could have just spoken to me herself, and it would have been much more respectful. To be honest, I didn't even know how she could afford the rent at all. Because from what I know, she hadn't worked a day, and I didn't think that she had any savings of her own, but apparently she did. It was just not enough though, but that was not my problem, and I told my parents that it was her own fault that she hadn't worked when she was in college, even though she knew that our parents would not be supporting us as adults. Now, her not being able to afford rent for her first house was a problem that she herself had created, and she was going to have to deal with this on her own. Besides, covering my college expenses was way more important than her being able to move into a house with her friends. I thought that my parents would be reasonable enough and understand why I did not want to share my savings with her, because so far, they have never been the kind of parents who have treated my sister and I differently. But instead, they started throwing a fit about how I was acting and told me that I was being really selfish. They had thought that it would be easy enough to convince me, I don't know why, and when I refused to help her out, they started fighting with me. After a really bad argument with my parents regarding this, my dad just snapped at one point, and he told me that if I was going to be selfish and not share my savings with my sister, then that would just mean that I did not value my family as much as they had expected me to. So then, even they would behave the same way with me and be selfish and ask me to leave the house. Basically, my only two options were to either help my sister out and share my savings with her or get kicked out. I chose the second option because honestly, that was really humiliating for me. I had never expected my parents to use the fact that I was relying on them for a while, at least until I made it to college, against me. But I guess their priority was my sister right now, and I'm not sure, but I think it was because they didn't want anyone to know that our family hasn't been doing well financially. And if my sister had been honest with her friends and had them cover for her, she would have had to tell them all about our financial situation, and since these are her friends from high school, their parents would have found out as well. And their parents know my parents pretty well since it's a pretty small and close-knit neighborhood. So I guess that's why they did not want my sister telling anyone about what was going on. In fact, they had put in a lot of effort into hiding the fact that we were struggling financially. Not even anyone in the family knew about it, except for my uncle and his wife. My uncle is my dad's older brother, and since he had been one of the first investors in my dad's business, of course, he knows about it. Initially, my dad had even been against the idea of me having my uncle become a cosigner on the loan application, but had to agree with it eventually since being a cosigner on both my and my sister's applications could backfire. So even though he did not like the idea of being even more in debt to my uncle, he had to let me go to him for help. And it wasn't even like I was going to college nearby. I was going to college out of state, so that was going to be even more expensive. Anyway, I knew that their reputation meant a lot to them. And I knew that they were going to extreme lengths to make sure that nobody found out about how they were struggling. And after the fight that I had with my parents, and I left home, I still couldn't deal with the fact that they had just kicked me out because I refused to play by their rules. It was insulting and humiliating, and so, I decided to take advantage of the fact that their reputation and the money meant so much to them. After that argument, I started packing my things immediately, and my parents did not even make an effort to stop me. That night itself, I had packed all the things that I needed and stuffed them into a bag, then got a cab and headed to my uncle's place. I did feel a bit guilty about bothering him constantly, but when I got there and explained the situation to him, he told me that I was welcome to live with him and his wife for as long as I wanted to. Their kids were grown up and living independently, so I'm staying in my cousin's room right now. When I had left, my parents had been standing at the door and they did not try to stop me. Even when my uncle called my father up to speak to him about what was going on with me, my dad made it sufficiently clear that if I was not going to think about my family and put them first, then they had no place for me in their house. It was ironic that they were calling me selfish, but in my opinion, they were the ones who were actually being selfish. So for the past week, I've been living with my uncle and they have been nice enough, but that has still not helped to take my mind off of things. My uncle and my aunt keep telling me that things are going to be alright and that they are positive that my parents are going to come to their senses eventually and apologize to me, but I'm not so sure anymore. And last evening, I had been feeling particularly low and then, I don't know what came over me and I just decided that I needed to talk about this. But I was feeling really vindictive as well, so instead of venting to my friends, I decided to post and spill all the tea. I typed out a post with every little detail of what had happened and completely exposed my parents, and then I hit the post button. After that, I kept my phone aside, and I went out for a walk because I knew that as soon as they found out about the post, my parents would start blowing my phone up. I hadn't blocked them anywhere so far, because I had been expecting them to reach out to me at some point, but in the past week, they had not even bothered to check on me. Anyway, when I came back home from my walk after about 30 minutes, my uncle and my aunt were both pretty serious and they told me that they had read my post and they didn't feel like it was necessary right now. But since I had already posted it without even speaking to them about it, all I could do was apologize to them for not letting them know. But I was just feeling really depressed and I wanted to get back at my parents somehow. They looked a little disappointed but didn't say much, so at least I am good on that end. But then, when I went back to my phone, I saw that I had several missed calls and messages from my parents, just as I had expected. All of the messages were along the same lines, that they had been right to ask me to leave the house because it was very obvious that I could not think about anyone apart from myself and that I was really selfish, and with this post, I proved that I was also a bad person. They were accusing me of ruining their reputation by making it sound like they were the bad guys here and that they had kicked me out on purpose, even though it had been my choice to leave because I would rather abandon my family when they needed my help than actually stand up like a man and be there for them. Most of the messages were really angry, and I felt kind of vindicated because at least now, they were feeling exactly how betrayed and let down I had been for the past week. And then, while I was reading the messages, I received a call from my mother again, and I decided to pick it up this time. As soon as I answered the phone, I regretted it because she was crying as if someone had died and I could hear my dad screaming at me in the background. He was cussing me out while my mother tried to speak to me through tears. It was kind of difficult to understand what she was saying, but I was able to make out that she was trying to get me to take that post down because a lot of our relatives had messaged them that it was unacceptable for them to try and force me to help them out financially because I was still really young, and I had my own future to think about, and instead of helping that daughter out, they were trying to take money from one ticket to give it to the other, and that was not fair. My mother was trying to make it sound like I hadn't told the entire story in my post and was acting as if I had framed the story in such a way that made them look like the villains, but honestly, I had only shared my side and I don't think it was my fault that our relatives did not agree with their behavior. And also, this is social media, I can share whatever I want to, but at least I had the decency of putting out the full truth and not hiding any details. But my mother started telling me that if I was sharing my side of the story, then I also should have shared how they had always supported me and my sister when it was possible for them, but now, they were only expecting us to help each other out because it was difficult for them to do so. She wanted me to put up a post about how extravagantly we lived while our father was supporting us. And then, I started feeling really guilty because that was true. Both my sister and I had been spoiled by our parents and they had left no stone unturned to make sure that we were well cared for when my dad was making a lot of money. But even then, I don't think that excuses the kind of behavior that I have had to face recently. Most importantly, my parents were upset because I decided to go public with this information even though I knew that the last thing that they wanted was for people to know that they were struggling with money. So right now, even though I have received a lot of support and love from a lot of family members and friends on social media, I'm still feeling guilty about the conversation that I had with my parents last evening. And even the way that my uncle and aunt are behaving, it's making me feel bad about what I did, and I feel like I should just take that post down. But before I do that, I just wanted to make sure that I'm actually in the wrong and it's not just me being manipulated into thinking that I did something bad. So Ida for putting up a post on social media and exposing my parents and their financial struggle? Edit. My relationship with my sister has not been good for a really long time. We used to be close when we were younger, but for the past 4 or 5 years, she has been acting really weird and I don't exactly know why. Maybe it's because of the kind of friend she is, because from what I know, all of them are really mean and snarky. And even though she didn't bully me or my friends when we were in school, I know that she had a reputation of being one, and that's part of the reason that I don't get along with her anymore, because I just can't stand bullies. To be honest, she has changed a lot, and I can't say that it's for the better. We hardly even speak anymore, and that day, when she decided to send our parents to speak to me about borrowing money, I felt weird because even though we were not exactly on great terms, we were at least on speaking terms, and she definitely could have come to me herself. In fact, if she had come to me herself, then I might have actually let her borrow the money. Anyway, she's been really weird about a lot of things recently, and her behavior has been very awful. She has a terrible attitude problem, and that's why I don't really speak to her anymore now. Update 1. Hey. So people in the comments had mixed opinions, and eventually, I just decided to go with my gut feeling. I took that post down because even though I had received a lot of support from my relatives, it didn't really mean much. It's not like anybody had actually reached out to me, it was just superficial support, and I knew that. Also, not even the people who had reached out to my parents to let them know that what they were doing was unfair, had reached out to me. So it was obvious that it was more important for them to call my parents out on their behavior, than actually be there for the person who had been through something. These people just wanted to be a part of the drama and feel included, so I took that post down because I had gotten back at my parents, so the purpose had been served. 4 days have passed since I last spoke to them, and I deleted the post this morning. After that, I decided to make things right with my uncle and aunt because I felt like I owed them an explanation, even more than my parents. They had tried to be there for me to the best of their abilities, and in spite of that, I hadn't even spoken to them before just making that post. And things had been pretty weird between us because I knew that they did not agree with my approach. So I woke up super early today, took that post down, and then I made breakfast for them so I could surprise them. And they were pretty surprised, and when I apologized for not speaking to them, they told me that it was fine, they had just been taken aback by the post. They also apologized to me for acting weirdly after that post because they just didn't know what to do or what to say to me to make it better. I guess it has just been a bit of a misunderstanding between us, and we decided to talk it through. I told them that I had just been feeling very upset and humiliated by how my parents had treated me, and even though I was very grateful to them for being there for me, I felt like I had to get back at my parents somehow, and maybe it was not the right thing to do, but I had to get it out of my system. And they told me that they understood why I had done what I had done, but they didn't necessarily agree with the approach that I had taken, by posting about it online for everyone to see. They told me that a lot of people in the family were very jealous of my uncle and my dad because in comparison to them, their lives had been great, and a lot of my relatives couldn't stand that, so it was natural for them to feel great about the fact that my dad was struggling. And that was part of the reason why he did not want any of this getting out. So that explained why so many of my relatives had shown me so much support in the comments, but hadn't actually bothered to reach out to me. They were happy about my dad's downfall but couldn't care less about what I was going through. Anyway, that lesson that I had learned, and I told them that I had taken that post down. Then, they told me that they were more than happy to have me over because I had always been a good kid and reminded them a lot of their own 2 sons. When they brought that up, I decided to tell them that I was also really upset with my sister because a huge part of the reason that my parents and I even had that fight that day was because I was upset that she hadn't come to me to ask for the money herself. I wasn't actually hoping to get an explanation about that, I was just venting to them since I hadn't told them about this bit before and neither had. I mentioned that in my post, but when I told them that my sister had sent our parents to me to ask for the money, they started looking very surprised. It was clear that they knew something, so I asked them what was bothering them, and they told me that they didn't understand why my sister had felt the need to make my parents ask for money to cover rent because she had already asked them to send her some money for rent and they thought that they had covered it all. Then, it was my turn to be surprised because I didn't know about any of that. After speaking to them for a bit more about this, I found out that while my sister had been in college, she knew that my parents were not in a position to support her, so any time that she would need, she would contact my uncle and aunt, and she had been relying on them as well. The student loan only covered all the college-related expenses, but of course, people have other expenses as well, and my uncle and aunt had covered all of that. They had never told me about it because my sister had wanted it to be a secret and had promised them that she would pay them back as soon as she had enough money to do so. And recently, a couple of weeks ago, She had reached out to ask them for a couple of $1,000s because she was moving into a new house with her friends and needed to cover her share of their rent. They had happily agreed to help her out because she finally had a job and she had told them that she was going to start paying them back now. So now, I'm really confused because if my sister had already borrowed money from my uncle to cover their rent, then why had she asked me to give her money? It just doesn't add up, and not even my uncle and aunt have any answers right now. They could talk to her themselves and get to the bottom of this, but they think that it would be better for me to discuss it with her myself since we clearly have a lot of things to talk about and clear the air between us. And I guess that's exactly what I'll have to do if I want to find out what's going on, because this is really fishy. Update 2. So 2 days have passed since my last update, and after a lot of deliberation, I finally decided to speak to my sister because that was the only way to get to the bottom of what was going on. I hadn't blocked her and neither had she, so I just texted her if she would be willing to speak to me, and she agreed quite easily. I called her last night and we ended up talking for quite a while because, as it turns out, I don't think she had any fault in any of this. So apparently, she had indeed borrowed some money from our uncle to cover part of the rent, but then, one of her friends just randomly decided that she was going to be living with her boyfriend and not her friends. And that meant that everyone would have to contribute extra for the end because one person had dropped out of their plan, and that put her in a bit of a difficult position because the house that they were planning on renting was pretty expensive. So she decided to ask our parents for help, just this once. And she told me that she had asked them to help her out with the money themselves. She hadn't told them to ask me, so she had no idea why they had done that, and she didn't even know they had come to me to ask for the money until I told her about it last night. Apparently, my parents had told her that the reason we got into a fight was because I was demanding money from them to add to my college savings, and they had refused, and my sister had bought it. She had no idea about the real reason I had fought with our parents, and when she found out, she was shocked. We were able to guess that our parents had probably not wanted to help her out by giving her money from their own pockets, and so, they had come to me and made it sound like she was asking me for help. We worked that out, and after that, we got to talking about our own sibling relationship. I decided to be honest with her, and I told her that the reason that I had distanced myself from her was because she had changed a lot as a person and had become very mean and was a bit of a bully. I thought that she was going to deny it and we would get into a fight, but she actually accepted it and said that she knew that she had been terrible in high school, but in college, she had changed a lot and she wanted to work on our relationship as well. But I just seemed so closed off that she didn't feel like it would work even if she tried to talk to me. So we decided that we were going to let the past go and try to work things out for the sake of our future, because it was obvious that our parents had taken advantage of the fact that we don't get along and tried to play us against each other. And for those of you who want to know, she was able to move into the new house with her friends, and she had to come up with some lame excuse as to why she only had part of the rent with her, but thanks to my post, they were able to figure out what was going on with the money anyway and offered to cover for her until she could pay them back. And in spite of what she had believed, her friends actually did not judge her, so kudos to them. Anyway, I was able to get to the bottom of what had happened, and as a bonus, I was able to work things out with my sister as well, so I'm quite happy with the situation right now. My parents and I have still not spoken, and after what I just found out, I don't think we are going to be on speaking terms anytime soon. In fact, I would even say that my sister is probably about to stop speaking to them. Update 3. So, guys, I recently started college, and I already love it. A good few months have passed since I last spoke to my parents and they have blocked me. I don't know why they blocked me, because judging by their actions, I should have been the one to block them. Anyway, my sister doesn't speak to them anymore, ever since she found out the truth about what happened between me and my parents. But we are trying to actively work on our relationship and go back to being the siblings that we used to be. So far, I would say that it's going pretty well, and I'm really happy about that. My uncle and aunt have obviously kept in touch with me, and it's a really happy coincidence that one of my cousins, one of their sons, recently started working on a project that will require him to come to my state quite often. So I'm gonna see him pretty soon now, and I don't even really miss my parents anymore. I do wish that we might be able to make things right someday in the future, but until then, this works just fine with me.